All right. All right. Thank you so much. Yeah. So this is the exciting part of the morning of this presentation. Is the best part is the keynote, of course. I wanted to introduce Naaman. He is a professor at Cornell Tech in New York City, and previously he was on the faculty of RecSys. He has his PhD from Stanford. I know more from his days at Yahoo Research when he led the lab at Yahoo Berkeley, which was a very interesting lab that sort of sat between industry and academia and worked on really cutting-edge, interesting projects. And I can say from a personal standpoint, that Moore's work on location and Flickr inspired me to look at location, which became a passion of mine in terms of research topics. So I don't want to delay Moore's talk, so I'm going to turn this over to Moore. Moore, would you please come on up? One last reminder that for everyone in the room, if you want to ask a question, please ask the question on Slido.
Thank you, Vanessa. In recent years, there has been a proliferation of artificial intelligence applications in various aspects of human life, from health and education to finance and transportation. With the increasing presence of AI in our lives, it is inevitable that AI will also increasingly mediate our personal communications with others. This raises a number of questions about how AI-mediated communication will reshape human-to-human communication, relationships, and languages. In this keynote address, I will explore some of the potential ways in which AI-mediated communication could reshape human-to-human communication and relationships, as well as some of the ethical concerns that this may raise. One potential way that AI-mediated communication could reshape human communication is impacting the level of trust that we have in one another. Here's the thing. Everything I said so far since taking the podium, except for the thank you, Vanessa part, has been written by AI. In fact, it was written by the GPT-3 large DaVinci 002 model, if you want to be specific. I didn't do that to showcase how good the large language models that we have today is. You probably all are aware of these models and how well they can perform. I used the AI-generated text to demonstrate how it may undermine the trust that you, the audience, may have in me, the speaker. So now that you know that your very first impression of me was augmented by AI, actually created by AI, how is it going to impact your impression of me, the trust in what I'm going to do on stage? Are you going to trust me less? Are you going to discount my performance? What if you didn't know but only suspected that what I said or what I'm saying right now has been generated by AI? How would that change your impression of me? Will it have the same effect? Even worse, what are you going to think about the next speaker, possibly with an accent just like myself, who comes on stage and gives a fluent English language speech? Are you going to suspect that they used AI and that is not going to change your impression of them? Or maybe we'll come to expect that people use AI to author their presentations in conferences, just like we expect people to use spell check when they write professional emails nowadays. So trust is just one example. In this talk, I'm going to talk about more than just trust, about the various ways that AI, as an increasingly capable agent in human-to-human exchanges, can have an impact, right? So anything from making a recommendation of what we should say to augmenting the presentation in different ways. It will change our interactions, and it can impact our language, our social interactions, and our society in various ways. Before I do all that, maybe I should define AI-mediated communication a little better. You may recognize the term computer-mediated communication. That has been around for a while and has been a decades-long interest to academics. Traditionally, computer-mediated communication assumes that we have a sender that crafts a message that is perhaps adapted to the channel, and that message is pretty much transmitted to the receiver the way the sender created it and crafted it. The message could be text message or email, but it can also be recorded or live video, Zoom, whatever it is, any other computer-mediated exchange. Increasingly, though, we have communication channels where we have an AI agent that participates in the communication act, and maybe suggests edits, modifications, maybe generates the entire message on my behalf. So we call this AIMC, or AI-Mediated Communications. Let me give you some examples of AIMC, starting with ones that is used by billions of people every day, and probably you're using it as well. Smart replies. Here, for example, Google offering helpful suggestions on how I should like my students' Maurice's dissertation proposal. We have autocomplete, which is another common example of AI-mediated communication. We have now services that not only suggest text improvements, but also give you feedback about how it might sound like to the person who is receiving the email. Of course, increasingly, we have new services that can write entire emails, or rather, any other content on your behalf as a service, and you know we're just one stop away from an AI service that automatically sends happy birthday, well-crafted happy birthday emails or messages to all your friends. It's not just email. For example, LinkedIn will write an automatic profile summary for you already, which is not unrelated to some of the examples and context I'll show later on in this talk. I talked just about text. AI-mediated communication is not just text. Audio, for example, there are already companies offering accent shift with all the problems that it might raise. Future AI services can also perhaps remove my Israeli accent, or make me sound more like the King of England, or maybe deceptively shift my speech to the local accent of every single person who's listening to me on a video call. This might improve comprehension, might improve trust, whether we target it or not. In fact, we're seeing an example of AI-mediated communication right now with the transcription here and online for the talk. So this relates to our definition of AIMC, which is interpersonal communication optimized, augmented, or even generated by algorithms to achieve specific communicative or relational outcomes. So action shift, the example that I just gave, is one way, for example, to improve communicative outcomes, so people understand me better, or relational outcomes. They might trust me more, whether it's deceptive views or not. So better outcome for me, the speaker. So it's not just audio as well. Increasingly, we see video content that is also augmented by AI. So this is recently just an example from NVIDIA. They can shift your face to look like you are looking at the camera in your Zoom talk. Not to mention, Snapchat and other real-time filters in our various video conferences. Again, future AI can deceptively change your face to make you look more like the recipient, and that is known, for example, to increase trust in the speaker. So there are many things that are coming, including not just live captioning, but also live translation. Maybe it's also useful to say what is not AI-mediated communication. So just a few examples to define this boundary, what I'm not going to talk about today. Algorithmic news feeds, for example, they're powered by AI and enable human communication, but they're not done on behalf of the communicators. So I'm not including those in the definition. Deepfakes and synthetic media are obviously an area that overlaps with these ideas. I care about them in this context when they are impacting our evaluation of others or evaluation content created by others. And we also have things like voice assistants and bots that are related, especially considering that people often treat those as social actors, and that they might impact how we converse with others using AI tools and understand those tools as well. So related, but not exactly AI-mediated communications. In general, as the title of this talk suggests, we have mounting evidence that I'll talk about today of the impact that AIMC might have. And in particular, I'm going to talk about a few different types of impact it might have. I'm going to show the impact that it has on language. I'm going to show that smart replies can cause a positivity shift in the language that we use. I will show that autocomplete can shift the content of what we write about. And moreover, I will show that autocomplete can have some impact in terms of latent persuasion, that it actually changes our opinions as we write. And finally, I'll show the impact that AI might have on the feeling of ownership of the content that we produce. In the second part of the talk, I will show how AI-mediated communication can have an impact on our social dynamics. I will show how it can change how we blame each other when communications fail, and how AI can help communication along, but at the same time cause people to distrust each other when they think AI was involved in the conversation. In fact, given the importance of when people think AI is involved, or the perception of AI use, I will take a short detour to show what makes people suspect AI has authored a piece of text. So the perception of AI. And then I will close giving all this new evidence with some implications and consideration for AI for our society and culture. Notice that a lot of the examples that I gave and all of the research that I'm going to talk about are going to focus on the text-based domain, where we have AI already making a lot of progress with large language models and a lot of services that are already out there. But I will come back to multimedia, image, video content at the end of the talk. Also note that the studies I will talk about were done as part of an NSF-funded project between Stanford and Cornell with PhD students across 3 beautiful campuses in New York City, Ithaca, and Stanford, doing most of the work I'll present today. This is Maurice, Hannah, and Jess. I will go into the most details about the studies that I've done with my PhD student and friend, Maurice, here. And should also note that all these 3 students have either just finished their PhD or finishing right now, so hint, hint, you can follow up. Okay, let's start with how AI-mediated communication has the power to shift language and even more than that. So here's the first email that I showed you from Maurice and the suggested Gmail smart replies. And as I hinted before, these are not just smart, they are also overwhelmingly positive replies. Looks great, I think it's perfect, will do, and so on. So these suggestions might not only impact the language that I choose to reply if I use them, they also might impact my language or set expectations of how I reply without using them. Furthermore, they may cause other people, they may cause social shift as other people see those overwhelming responses and over time adapt to use them in their language as well, whether or not they're using smart replies. All of this might impact disproportionately non-native speakers that think these are culturally appropriate terms to use, as well as maybe kids and other people who are learning the language. So in the first study, this is a study from Hannah at Stanford, and I'll tell you about this and another study that looked at the positivity shift. What she did in this study, she had a communication task. She had people come into the lab in pairs, and they did some kind of a communication task, and they either used Google Hangouts or not. And at the end, she looked at the language that they use and how much emotion, how much positivity they expressed in the language. So in this study, the results showed that indeed the AI-assisted language was more positive. Indeed, you see at the top, for many of the studies, I'm not going to go into the details, but just give you the high-level outcome. So here you see at the top that most of the added positivity was in the what we call the augmented smart replies, so when people used the suggestions and changed them a little bit. And some of it was in the yellow bar as well, where people just use the AI suggested responses as they are. In the other, when people did not use the AI suggested text, it was roughly the same kind of emotion and positivity as in the control condition when they did not have any smart replies. Jess did a similar study as well. Here is her setup. She had 219 pairs discuss an issue, a policy issue online, and she randomized whether or not any one of them used the smart replies. So they were either available or not to any of the participants. And then in this case, she used a custom engine that the team created to provide either positive or negative smart replies. And she also used the Google API for smart replies. The results, again, show that the AI smart replies, whether they were provided by Google or our own, the team's own positive engine, I was not on that paper actually, led to more positive content in the exchanges compared to control. And in fact, when there were negative smart reply suggestions, they also led to more negative content in the exchange. I will come back to this study later in the talk because it had some other interesting things in it. So far, I documented some of the positivity shift that happens when we use smart replies, including Google's off-the-shelf tools. But here's a study that we have done recently that's shown that we can shift people's content as well. In this case with autocomplete, and we can shift them to write more about some of the categories that we want them to write about. So we use as a baseline a 2017 study from my group, where we kind of broke down the different categories people might list when they write their Airbnb host profile. And we had a lot of content labeled, so we can train and fine-tune models to topics like work and education, or topics like taste and interests. Both these are two of the topics we used in our study here. And then people used autocomplete, fine-tuned with either one of these models to write their host profile, right? That's the task that we asked them to perform. And indeed, that we find that the models that were fine-tuned to autocomplete based on a certain category cause people to write more words in that category that they otherwise would. So in the figure, you see on the left, when people had the interest model, they wrote a lot more of their text about the profile, about their interest. And when they had autocomplete that was tuned to provide more work and education, they wrote more work and education profiles. So this might be a very simple nudge that influenced people to write one way or another about a certain topic. But our most recent research showed that this nudge also works when you ask people to write about opinions in different categories. So, and even more than just write about opinions, I'll show you in a second. This is a study really hot off the press. We just submitted it last week, and it was led by my student, Maurice. In this study, you see this is the experiment prompt. We were wondering if we can, if the autocomplete can shift both the content and the opinion that people might have about a topic. So this is what we did. We had a Reddit-looking post that where we asked participants to write a reply paragraph about the prompt that says, is social media good for society or not? And there's some text under that says, some people say it's very Reddit-like. Some people say it's good. Help me understand why it's good or bad. And what we did is we had two different autocomplete models. We used prompt engineering from this one with GPT-3, and the system then produced, as the people were typing, autocompletions that either leaned towards social media is good, or they lean towards social media is bad. We also had the control condition with no autocomplete suggestions at all. So the first thing that we saw is that content shift indeed happened. As we expected, the autocomplete suggestions shifted the participants' writing. So what you see in the top row are the people who got the social media is good autocompletes. The bottom row is people who got social media is bad. The middle is the control. On the right end, the red colored bars is the amount of text that people wrote that suggests social media is good. And on the left in blue is the text that people writing about social media is bad. So we see content shift, right? People who got the text that says, the auto-completions that said social media is good, indeed wrote more about that topic. And they did it more than the natural tendency, as you can see in the people in the control group, and obviously more than people who got the social media is bad suggestions. More interestingly, the autocomplete suggestions also shifted the participants' expressed opinions. So when we asked them in the survey, people who got the social media is good suggestions ended up being more likely to say that social media is good for society overall when we asked them for their opinion. They were more likely to do that in the control group, and obviously we saw the opposite effect with the people who saw the social media as bad suggestions. So we call this latent persuasion, right? So we have the language model that just by the suggestions may shift people's opinions about a topic. The next part of the talk may explain a little bit why this is happening, and this is where Hannah studied the ownership of the that people feel when they write together with AI suggestions. So she asked, how do people perceive the agency and ownership when they have autocomplete? And she had the quantitative and qualitative evaluation of people either writing with autocomplete or with not on different topics. And it turns out that people kept the feeling of ownership and agency about the content they produced when they were expert about the topic. Right? So when they were writing without AI suggestions, they felt a certain level of ownership that you see on the right, on the left. And when they were getting suggestions, they kept the feeling of ownership when they were expert about the topic they were writing about. But when they were not expert, they felt less ownership about the content that they produced. So this might explain a little bit about why in the previous study opinions have shifted. People may have not felt that they are expert about whether social media is good or bad, and the lack of ownership helped them get swayed by the language model's own opinion. In summary, it's a bit scary, right? We're starting to deploy these large language models at scale for various human communication tasks, but not only they can change our language, they also have the potential to shift our opinions and our relationship to the content that we produce. I'll go to the next part of the talk. And in this part, I would like to share some of the studies of how AI-mediated communication also may shift our social dynamics. So first, I will show how it can impact our communication outcome and dynamics, like blame that I mentioned before. And then I will show that AI can impact how we form impressions of each other, especially when we're talking about trustworthiness. So here's one study from Jess in this setup. This is different than the study before. In this setup, she had two participants that are performing a task, but one of the participants is really a confederate. Somebody is working with a research team. And they had a 2x2 setup. The confederate set the conversation to be either successful or not successful, right? So the confederate at some point would say, oh, we didn't reach our goal, right? They had some kind of a task that they had to perform. And they had, whether they were using just a regular messaging platform or one with smart replies. And it turns out they have a couple of findings. So first, the participant trusted the confederate more when everybody was using AI smart replies. So AI helped the communication along. And the second thing that they showed that there was a shift of responsibility under those different conditions. So let me walk you through these slides, this graph. Here we see how people felt responsible for the communication outcome under the different conditions. So on the left, you see that when the task was successful and they didn't use AI, you can see that they thought the partner was as responsible for the outcome as themselves, right? When the task was unsuccessful, as is human nature, they blamed the partner, right? The responsibility was of the partner. This is still without AI. When they used AI and the task was successful, the responsibility was still shared. But when they used AI and the task was not successful, they in fact assigned less blame to the participant than they did without AI. So AI kind of deflected some of the blame in this case in what Jess has called the moral crumple zone of AI. Right? AI took some of the hit for the participant, for the failure. Now that we talked about ownership and blame for AI content, maybe it's a good time to explain the very title of this talk. Right? My AI might have been broken alludes to a future where, similar to Jess's study, people actively blame AI for conversation and communication that have gone awry. Right? This is the inspiration for this quote. And I should also say that I didn't come up with this quote. This quote was generated by AI itself, in fact, GPT-3, where I asked it to generate a funny joke that is related to the talk abstract. I gave it the abstract of this talk, and it came up with this response. Now, if it is not so funny, you know who to blame. All right, so let me talk about the second part, about how AI might impact how we form impressions and especially trustworthiness of one another. And for that, I'm going to go back to Jess's study that I mentioned earlier, when they had dyads interact with smart reply suggestions. And we already showed that it caused a shift to more positive language when we used AI. But here, they also asked, how do they like the other person, depending on the different conditions of whether AI was used or not. So first, did they like the other person better when the person was using smart replies? And second, did they like them better when they thought they were using smart replies? Because they didn't actually know. So it turns out that using smart reply actually helped. Participants liked the other person more when the other person was using smart replies, presumably because of the positive attitude or the ease of communication or the speed of communication. We're not sure why. But that was without actually being aware of whether the other person was using it or not. So when they thought the participant, the other side, was using smart replies, they actually felt less affiliation towards them. They liked them less than they otherwise would. So there was a cost in the perception that they use smart replies in the evaluation of the other. The next study I'll describe in a little bit more detail also was designed to understand how this perception of AI use can shift our evaluation in others. We did this in the context of online self-presentation. The main research question was, will people evaluate trustworthiness of a person differently if they believe AI was involved in authoring their online profile? And this was our very first AI-MC experiment back in 2019. It was led by my student, Maurice. So for this study, we had 3 online experiments. I will describe this in a little bit more detail. We had Airbnb profiles that were all human written in 2019. It's hard to remember, it was only 3 years ago, but we still did not have widely available language models that can produce human-like text. So instead, we led participants to believe that the text was written by AI or by a human. And you'll see, I'll explain the manipulation a bit more in a second. And at the end, we asked them to rate the host for trustworthiness, so how much they would trust the host as an Airbnb host. So this is what they may have seen. Sometimes we showed them profiles and we said explicitly these were generated by AI, and sometimes we didn't. So they might see an Airbnb profile like this, and they would ask to rate it. Kate, are you here? Can you launch our poll? Before I go into the study, we have a little exercise. And this exercise is whether you can guess which one of these 2 profiles was written by a human. Right? One of them was written by AI. And I'll come back to these later. I'll let you read them for a second. The way to do it is you either go to slido.com and enter this number, or you scan the code The code is also right in the back of your badge, right here. This is also the same place where you get the live Q&A. Can people see the poll? Yeah, great. So I'll give you a second to select, is it profile A or profile B? A few more seconds to read, and then you can do the voting. Okay, so let me move on, and we'll come back to these later. So this was the experimental settings. Remember, all of these in our study back then, they were still all written by humans. But still, even in that case, when we asked raters to say whether they think a profile was written by human or by AI, we told them some were written by AI. Can they distinguish them? They had a pretty strong sense. There were some profiles, some heuristics that people use, and some profiles were distinctively more human or more AI than other profiles. So as you can see here, a profile that says, "Let me open with a huge hello to everybody," was seen as more human, and something more formal like, "Hello, I am Sebastian," was seen as more AI. So those we could extract consistently 30 profiles from that were either look consistently more human or consistently more AI to others. We randomly, for each participant, picked 5 of each, and they rated them for trustworthiness. So we asked them how trustworthy the host seems along 3 different dimensions. And we did it in 3 conditions. One was a control condition when we didn't say anything about AI. We told them these are all Airbnb hosts. Here are the profiles. What do you think about their trustworthiness? In another condition, we had unlabeled, but we told them some of them were written by AI. And in the third condition, we labeled those that look more like AI. We actually had the little label that said generated profile created by AI. So let's see what happened. And again, I'll walk you through from the left to the right. On the left, you see that when we didn't tell people anything, they actually rated the AI-rated profiles, the ones in the orange dot, as more trustworthy than the human-looking profiles. Right? Again, remember, everything here is written by humans, but just looks more like AI or looks more like human. So the AI-looking profiles were rated higher, and when we didn't tell people anything. When we told people that some of them were written by AI, immediately those that looked more like AI took a hit. Right? They were maybe suspected, they were seen as less trustworthy. And then finally, when we labeled those as AI, they really took a hit. They were seen and rated as less trustworthy by our participants. In fact, there was one trend that was clear. Even the suspicion that the profile was written by AI caused an immediate hit for the rating. So here you can see on the x-axis the rating that they gave from definitely human written to definitely AI generated, and the trustworthiness score is on the y-axis. So even a little bit of suspicion was enough to drop the trustworthiness score. We gave it a name. We called it the replicant effect, with apologies to Philip K. Dick, who actually called it androids, but never mind. So it was mostly Ridley Scott in Blade Runner. So just like the movie, our experimental world was populated by both humans and non-human agents that imitated humans, right, the replicants. And in such an environment, even the suspicion that somebody was a replicant caused a decrease in trust. And notice the important thing is the collateral damage here. Actual humans may be hurt also as a result because they may seem to others like replicants, right, like AI. By the way, more recent work has replicated this finding in dating profiles. This is not from my team. Interestingly, same thing with trustworthiness happened with dating profiles, but the attractiveness rating did not change when people suspected AI. I'm not sure what that means. And we also, there's a paper showing that in email correspondence, then similar results to Jess's study, was generally lower trust in content that was perceived to be written by AI. So, in summary, I showed you more evidence that AI-MC stands to change some aspects of our communication, how we evaluate each other in this case. And this was especially, I've shown that the suspected use of AI in multiple contexts can reduce the trust evaluation that we give others. We call this the replicant effect. So this observation that the suspected AI language may cause a difference in trust led us to a little research adventure and also to the next part of the talk. So in this part, we thought it was important to understand the question of when people actually perceive that the text was written by a human versus text was written by AI. So when you think about this, one question you might immediately ask is, can people detect language that was generated by AI? But this has been asked, turns out a lot. It also turns out that people cannot tell the difference. So in various contexts, from news articles to poetry to stories and recipes and even Shakespearean verse, people cannot distinguish between human and AI written text. We'll replicate these results in a second in our study as well. But instead of asking if people can detect language that was generated by AI, we asked, when do people believe language was generated by AI? And we did this again in the context of self-presentation, for the same profiles that I've shown you before. We'll still come back to them in a second. And we asked people more precisely, what are the features and the heuristics that they use to decide whether a profile text was written by AI? And we also asked if we can predict when people will think something was AI or something human. And we say, can we predict? Can we have a model that can predict that? So here's what we did in this study, again, led by my student Maurice. We created a data set of human profiles. We trained models to create AI-generated profiles based on these human profiles. We got rating and feedback from raters about how human or AI these profiles look. And then we developed features and classification to predict humanness, right? What would look more human to our raters than others. We did this across 3 domains. You see the prep on the left and the experiment setup on the right. Hospitality, Airbnb. We did this in the dating domain. We did it in a professional, kind of like an Upwork style profile. We used the 2 models, GPT-2 for the first study and experiment, and GPT-3 for the other 2. We used 125K profiles for the fine-tuning. We ran 3 experiments with 7,000 test profiles, half of them written by AI, half of them written by humans, and a lot of participants to get the ratings. This is the prompt that they had, similar to my previous study. They were asked to say how much profile that they saw on the top was definitely AI to definitely human on the right. So this was the only task in this case. We just, no trustworthiness, we just asked them to say if they think it's AI or not. So it was not a surprise that people did not do well in this task. Right, they were no better than random here. Random choice will be 50%. Across the 3 domains, they could not tell what profiles were human and what profiles were AI. However, they were not actually random. In fact, there was more agreement between the participants, our raters, than we would predict if we was just random chance, right, that they click. So there was some pattern there. So they were wrong, but they were wrong together, at least some of the time. And in fact, we had a model based on the features that we computed that could guess when what will people label a profile as. Not great accuracy, but I'll show you some validation of these features in a second. So about almost 60% accuracy. But here are some of the features that people use to These are the heuristics that they use to come up with something that's AI or not. So a sign of AI for people was if some content was nonsensical. So for example, they may have, the text might say something like, we have 2 kids, we love going hiking with our kids, Vanessa, Max, and Jen. Right, so there will be some nonsense there, right? So 2 or 3 kids, people will associate that with AI. Repetitive content was associated with AI as well. When there were grammatical errors, there was associated with AI, as well as any sophisticated language, right? Where people use rare bigrams or when the profiles use rare bigrams or long words, they were more likely to be associated with AI by our raters. And finally, something that suggested familiarity, like writing in the first person or using family mentions, was associated with human written texts. It turns out that those heuristics were indeed sometimes flawed. So in case you were wondering which of the intuitions were correct, at least for now, the language models that we used did produce some nonsensical content, so that was associated with AI correctly, as well as the repetitive content. I think those will probably go away when we have newer and stronger large language models. On the other hand, grammatical errors were actually more predictive of human written profiles. So the human written profiles had more of them, so our participants were wrong in assuming that this is AI. Similarly, with the sophisticated language, that was actually more used in the human language than the AI-generated content that was a bit more simplified than the other texts. And the familiarity, the family words did not suggest either way. So remember my little survey? Not only we can see how many of you are right or wrong, I can also see if whether you align with my expectation of what you think will be AI. So Vanessa can tell us what happened. 55% of the people said A was human, which is roughly indeed what I would expect, right? So A was actually written by AI. So you're wrong, but that's okay. Everybody's wrong. There's no way to actually tell. But also you had similar flawed heuristic, right? The profile on the left seems more human because it's first person. It has family mentions. It's a little bit more informal than the one on the right. So people and you, many of you, associated that with a human written profile. So we also did a validation, as I mentioned. So if these features are correct, a model can actually produce language that is more human or more AI, as we wish. To do that validation, we did the pre-registered experiment. We had rated in 100 profiles in each of 3 settings, the hospitality, dating, and professional settings. And with 100 of each type, either profiles that were written by humans, profiles were written by AI, or profiles that were written by what I call a condition that we called AI+. So these are profiles that were written by AI, but our model from earlier predicted that they will be seen more like human profiles than AI profiles. So these are AI+. So let's see what happens. This is in one context, in the hospitality context, and indeed, you can see a very strong effect. The human profiles were about, I think it's about 54% of the time they were rated as human. The AI profiles were also rated as human about 54% of the time. And, but the AI plus profiles, the ones that our model predicted would look more like humans, indeed looked more like they were written by a human, almost 65% of the time here. And the effect was even stronger, for example, here in the professional condition. So this is upsetting, right? AI is increasingly creating language that we use in communication, but people trust AI-generated communications less. They trust it less, but they can't distinguish. In fact, they're easily misled by content, could be easily misled by content that is produced produced by AI. I believe these trends have some very strong, perhaps dire implications for our culture and our society. So I'll spend a few minutes of that at the end of this talk right now. I'll outline some areas of considerations as we push forward with these systems and technologies. The first question we need to ask is this the end of all computer-mediated communication? Right? In the worst case, the effect of AI-mediated communication may be quite bleak. If augmented communication is easier to generate, harder to detect, cause distrust, AI may render almost all of computer-mediated communication unreliable. It will undermine any interactions that are beyond those that occur face-to-face, maybe in a similar effect to this quote that is attributed to Einstein, like everything else on the internet. So that may happen, but also AI might have a good effect, has the potential to improve human communication and help us be more understandable and collaborate with one another. So let's look at text generation, for example, smart replies, autocomplete, the new services that write entire paragraphs on your behalf. They often tout efficiency, increased communication, and faster communication, right? This is, for example, from the Google API Smart Reply guide. So this is a great first-level engineering outcome. But we've seen today in my talk other outcomes, often unmeasured, definitely not optimized for, are also likely. For example, the effortless email that we may send in the future might reduce trust and make that medium meaningless. This is an example from my friend John Horton on Twitter just the other week, where all the effort that we might put in writing a polite response to an editor asking us to review a paper can just be generated by AI. Right? So this used to be a sign of respect and attention. That signal is now going to be lost. So interestingly, the complicated interactions in AI-mediated communication make it challenging, right? The interplay between the user, the sender, the receiver of the message, the societal considerations. We can see feedback loops that occur when people might strive to sound like AI, or AI tries to sound like people, or people try to sound not like AI. Readers are trying to guess what is AI or not. And in the meantime, we have language that can shift, maybe even at large scale as a result. And we need to architect and think about the system that aligns with both the sender needs, the receiver needs, and our societal goal. Turns out that this might be challenging. And again, I'm going back to the point I made earlier. This is not just text. Increasingly, we have images and videos that are generated by AI, augmented by AI in various ways, creating visuals like the ones seen here. In fact, all the images, except a few in my talk, were generated by AI and DALL-E in this case. I also didn't consider outright deception that we might see in the future. In text and audio and video, AI is creating capabilities that are not only deep fake, but allow us to deceive in lighter ways in everyday exchanges online. It can be used for anything from interpersonal persuasion to political persuasion, in other contexts like business, journalism, conference reviewing, everything. And just when you thought when Instagram filters were cheating enough, now we have all this other stuff that we need to think about. So what can we do? What are some of the responsibilities as technologists? Just one more minute, Vanessa, to finish up with this. I don't have answers of what we can do for these hard problems, but I have a few directions to consider. One is that we need solid design guidelines for AI-mediated communication specifically. For example, we need to create tools that help maintain the agency and choice people have in the communication, but we also need to think about transparency and disclosure, right? When to tell the other side that those tools have been used and for what purpose. Those can be an issue as well. AI disclosure rules, for example, might hurt people who use AI for accessibility reasons, for example, text-to-speech users. By the way, we discussed some of these implications in the paper that I cite below. And also, I'll give you a link at the end of the talk to all of the papers, all of the research that I mentioned here today. Of course, responsible treatment of data and models is one more thing that we need to think about in AIMC, but also I know a lot of people in this community are thinking about that as well. We need to think of the openness of the model, but also the data used for the model, and even the output, perhaps, that those models produce. Some large language model efforts have been more open than others. For example, the Stable Diffusion text-to-image has been using the common crawl, so everybody can know what data has been used. But on the other hand, they have other problems. For example, Stable Diffusion allows anyone to create any kind of content, even with known figures, images of known figures, with very little safety features built in. It is possible that in order to do better in all these areas, we will need better regulation. But as Kevin Rose recently suggested in the New York Times, better regulation will also need better education of the policymakers and of the public, which is part of our responsibility as the community. These people don't have any idea what's coming, and they don't have any idea of how to think about it. And I think it is our tool as a community, our goal should be our goal as a community to educate, reach out, and help them understand the technology and its implications. A very long time ago, Louis Mumford wrote that to perfect the range of machines without giving humane direction to the organs of social actions of social control is to create dangerous tensions in the structure of society. The question is, how do we decide, add social actions and social control to AI-mediated communication as we have new AI developments that made this area wide open? We need to think about the right frameworks and how to apply to AIMC, but instead we're racing ahead with the tech. We need to be there instead, ahead of them. That is my talk. I'll leave you with this view from the Cornell Tech campus, and I think we have time for questions.
So we have a lot of really excellent questions on the Slido. I don't think we'll have time to get through all of them. So there were several themes, so I'm going to ask questions that summarize some of the themes that people had in multiple questions. One theme was a question about how persistent are the changes in opinion that are driven by these nudges? Like, do they last over time, or are they ephemeral?
Yeah, great question. I think since we just finished the first round of the study last week, I don't have that answer. Maybe we can follow up with these participants in a few weeks or months. I think there are two big questions. One is how persistent they are, and two, what actually causes them, which is also something we're hoping to disentangle in future research.
Okay. Also, people were wondering about the bias in people's language that's induced by these suggestions. I know that when we worked on Flickr tags, there was a lot of tag suggestion work that changed how people described places. Mm-hmm. Does the nudging change how people interact in general, and to what extent, and only for certain types of interactions or for all interactions?
Yeah, so there are many different aspects, I think. These are all good questions, and the short version answer is like, we don't know yet, and I would love to see more information and research about it. Particularly with bias, I am worried about bias, and not only how language shifts over time, expectation of language shifts over time, who gets to participate in what discussion, and what language is perceived as dominant, how language becomes more homogeneous over time, and what kinds of language can be taking over. So I am worried about that. I think there'll be a lot of research to do in that area going forward. I don't have these answers. Okay, and then with respect to bias and trust, have you found evidence that part of the reason that people trust or do not trust AI is related to their predisposition to trusting people with a certain grammar or a certain way of expressing things or a certain perceived education or wealth background? Yeah, so that's another excellent question. So why do people distrust the AI? So it could be that the perception of who uses it. I don't think that's it. It could also be the perception of people have different AI attitudes, right? They might be more afraid of AI than others. We tested that, actually. That did not have an effect on why people use AI. or why people distrust the AI text. We also looked at whether people just think that others who use AI are just lazy, and therefore, they are less trusted. There's some that explains some of the differences, but I don't think it explains all of it. This is something that might shift in the future, but also something that might become even worse when more and more people have access to these tools and know what they can do. There are other things that might happen when AI is involved. For example, we always strive for a lot of certainty in communication, and we had AI in the middle. There is perhaps less certainty. There's something that might go wrong. We also lose the signals that we otherwise have, just like spell check took away some of that signal. AI content will take away the language signals that we used to rely a lot on. If you read about social information processing, that was a big thing when we started thinking about computer-mediated communication. So you can change all that. So a lot of different things that are happening with AI and trust. So.
Okay. It's noted that, there's a hypothesis that exposure to diversity increases people's tolerance. And so the question is, if the AI makes the communication normalized or very similar or very standardized, does that decrease people's tolerance, or does it create a situation where people become less or more sensitive to things that they perceive as other?
Yeah, great question. Again, my guess it will decrease the tolerance, right? So the example of the accent shift is especially problematic, right? So if now we're not normalizing other accents by not letting people hear them and interact with them, we are, causing an effect that is larger than just, this one conversation where you are talking to your customer service representative and they sound like you, right? This could be other circumstances, other outcomes that are not overall beneficial to our society. So I'm guessing it will be an undesirable effect across both text, audio, video presentation, whatever we may use.
Okay. And is there some way that this could be used to address things like hate speech?
So there's already some, like in social media, right? So Twitter will try to detect when you're using hate speech and will tell you, hey, are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to post this? It might sound wrong. So I think there is, like I mentioned, there are opportunities to use these AI technologies to actually make our communications better. I like the Twitter approach because it gives you agency, right? It doesn't say, here's a new message that I wrote for you that doesn't have hate speech. But instead it says, hey, I think your message is a little hate speechy. Would you consider changing it and posting something else or not posting it altogether? So I think there is a way where they can be helpful. But again, those are still challenging questions, even if we're trying to improve communication.
And then another set of questions were around, suppose that as people become more familiar with AI, it becomes more ubiquitous and more embedded in everything we do. Do you think the trust issues will stabilize? Like, will the next generation of people who grow up with this be more trustworthy of these systems?
Yeah, it's possible, but I think we've seen. I think there will be other challenges, right? The feeling of authenticity will not. It will be more acceptable that you use AI, but it will still seem inauthentic. So you can see today in Instagram filters, right, and the no filter movement, right? So people know that everything is filtered, but still feel the need to say this was not filtered, right? This was not written by AI. I think will still be there because of this disconnect between what people actually see or produce or write or think about and what the other side might see.
A next set of questions is, I find these really interesting. These are great questions. These smart replies, on the one hand, they decrease the amount of diversity in the communication, but on the other hand, they enable people to answer emails they might have not been able to answer before. So are there positive effects of having this? Have you noticed any or observed any increase in communication due to these auto responses?
Yeah, so a couple of the studies that I talked about actually show that when people don't suspect them, they actually improve communication outcomes and they improve how people like each other in the communication. So I think there is, as I mentioned also at the end, I think they could be beneficial. It's funny, last week I emailed my daughter, who's 10 years old, tomorrow, some math sheets to work on. It was still vacation for her, so I just sent her to her Gmail here are a couple of PDFs, can you do them before I get back home? And she'll replies with, thanks, I'll take a look, exclamation point. And yes, that helped her send me a positive answer that I was delighted with, but it was very clear there was a smart reply, and I was like, does it really mean that she'll take a look? I don't know. She did do the math sheets that day, at least. Doesn't happen every day.
So the EU has, the AI Act has a new mandate on transparency. Do you think that will change trust, or do you think it's possible to be fully transparent?
Yeah, so I think in this, I don't know the AI Act very well, the EU one, but I think labeling stuff will help in some ways. There have been challenges, like the Bot Act in California was not, I don't think, super successful because it disadvantaged some of the users that those bots have that are actually meaningful. So I think we'll need to think about how to make that transparency available, how to increase the agency of people to communicate why they used AI and how they used it, and how to do it in a trustworthy way, right? Because I can always go to another service, produce my text, reply to the editor, and paste it into Google, and I will not be seen as using smart replies. So, so I think it's still a challenge.
In terms of these, the things that AI will generate, so you were focusing on text replies, for instance. AI also generates code, it generates art, it generates lots of things. Are there special concerns for this beyond just what the concerns that you mentioned for text? So, for instance, would it affect the artist community, for instance, if AI is very able to generate, compelling art, or will it affect, if AI is able to generate code, then, that's the subject of literally every dystopian novel for the last few years.
Yes. No, definitely. I think we're just starting to understand what the impact it might have. I can see there will be impact on occupation, like artists or people who write code. There will be impact on evaluation, right? So how do we evaluate, the school essay? This is going out the door, right? Because once the kid discovers they can just go to the GPT-3 playground, they can write an essay about anything or write code for their school assignment. So I think it will change how we evaluate each other as well. So I think we're just starting to see the impact these technologies might have in our day-to-day life, and I think that's why it's good for us to start thinking about those frameworks and considerations of how to manage them before we race to finish the technologies.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.